I like to think of what we do at Evelyn Partners, and I've got brilliant, brilliant colleagues in the room, and we have a brilliant team around us, is try to help our clients empower them financially to use their finances to perhaps bridge from one chapter to the next, or bridge from one of life's inevitable transitions to the next. And the analogy that Lucy was using about waves in the investment world, which I'm really not going to talk about very much, you'll all be very pleased to hear, although I'd love to chat later if you want to talk about where interest rates are going or any of that good stuff. The big news is actually not Donald Trump and his tariffs. It's the retirement of Warren Buffett from Berkshire Hathaway at the ripe old age of 94. Not quite as old as Michael Crawford, but I love the fact that we've got these heroes. Warren Buffett is arguably the world's best investor, and we follow, what they do very closely. But he also left the financial world with lots of wonderful quotes, one of which is, "Only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked." And we all know that when life's inevitable transitions come along, you can feel a little exposed, and we would love to help people to feel comfortable and confident with their finances so that they're actually prepared in advance of those inevitable waves of life. And when I got thinking about waves, some are small, some are, enormous tsunamis, or they certainly feel like it at the time. And some can be more expected than others. We make intentional changes in life to move firms or change careers. Those also need resilience. And waves are not necessarily negative. So I have an absolutely amazing panel here today of brilliant experts in their respective fields. And we're going to cover broadly our relationships with key areas of our lives, from family and friends to money, and not forgetting ultimately our relationship with ourselves, which Lucinda, talked about already. This morning I was flapping about getting here at 8 o'clock, and I had a momentary moment of overwhelm by a small wave when I was in the bathroom and my teenage daughter came rushing in, started scrabbling around in the bathroom cupboard, and I said, "I'm in a bit of a hurry. Can you, what are you doing?" She said, "I'm looking for black eyeliner." And I said, "Not sure you should be wearing that to school." She said, "No, I need to put it on my 10-year-old brother because he's got to go to school as a K-pop idol today." Right, so that was a moment where I just, felt, you're going to make me late. It was, and it just made me realise that we all face these waves all the time. So just to mix it up a little bit, I'm going to ask my wonderful panel to introduce themselves and perhaps share something about a moment where recently where a small wave has knocked them off course a little bit. So to Barbara first, if I may, as you're here.
Okay, I'm Barbara Reeves. I'm a partner at a law firm called Mishkondareya. I'm a family partner, although I did spend 15 years of my initial career as a corporate lawyer, so I've been at sort of two ends of the spectrum. In terms of stressful moments, just lots. I mean, I was trying to think about how do I get here from North London. It's not always that easy with transport, and thinking about whether I should be staying overnight somewhere. And but anyway, it wasn't as difficult. I did spend quite a bit of time listening to. There's a program, Private Passions, on Radio 3, and people choose their pieces of music that they like to listen to, and there was a particular Bach piece that somebody was commenting about how relaxing it is to listen to Bach, and he's often viewed as a lawyer's composer because of the method, in terms of the mathematics of playing his music. But I found it very stressful this morning trying on my Apple app, trying to find the piece of Bach music that I wanted to listen to, which was meant to be calming me down. So, wasn't very successful.
I love that. And actually, legally and financially, I think what connects us is we want to be the conductor. We want to be there in the background.
Oh gosh, I mean, yeah.
I'd like to
I'm
think.
afraid in my household, my husband has learned the lingo, so I'm often accused of gaslighting him, or coercively controlling him when I'm map reading, or yes, it can be slightly irritating.
Thank you. And George, a very brave man on the panel.
Yeah. I'm in an esteemed company and I've been accepted into the girl crew, which is lovely.
A very lucky man.
Good morning, everyone. My name is George Brooke and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at a mental health organisation called the SOAK, where we work with children, adolescents and adults through the lifespan. But just to your question about a recent moment which maybe destabilised me, it wasn't really a sort of a seismic personal moment, but I was asked in the last kind of year or so by a colleague to close my eyes. I'm not going to make you do it, don't worry. But to close my eyes and reflect forward 10 years and imagine myself celebrating a significant achievement or life event in 10 years' time. And I was asked to picture that moment and how did I want it to be. And I closed my eyes and I sort of went through it. And what struck me afterwards is at no point was I really thinking of the place, of the budget, of whether or not there was cake or anything else, what wine we were having, or was it Prosecco or champagne. I actually only thought about the faces of those I wanted around me. And I realised afterwards that quite a few of those faces I maybe hadn't invested in for quite some time. I'd let those relationships lapse a little bit, be it parents, be it friends, wider family. And that should something significant come along in my life, I needed to start to actively re-engage and rekindle with those people so that when I do invite them in 10 years' time, they bloody well come. So for me, that was a really big kind of a moment. And I think it's helped me in the last couple of years because absolutely, I would say I'm firmly in the sandwich generation. And there is a lot going on. And it is nice to know now or be more cognizant of the fact that I am not doing this alone. And I do know who to talk to at various points.
Thank you. And over to Chloe.
Hello, everyone. So I am Chloe Oudiz. I am a certified divorce coach. And what that means is that I help people to navigate divorce with less conflict. So a little bit back to the previous panel, there will be the lawyer will be the surgeon, but I am the vitamins, the exercise program, and everything else that goes around it to make sure that you handle that transition as best as possible. You probably have guessed from the resemblance, but I am Serena Williams' sister, and I love tennis. And a few years ago, I injured myself at tennis, and it was a big moment of realization in my life. I'm a single mom, so I am the only adult in the house, and I couldn't walk. I couldn't even go upstairs anymore. And there was a big vulnerability involved with that, and realizing that things are fragile. And that if I can't run the show, there is no show. And I think that was a big wake-up call in terms of taking better care of myself, planning for later life. I have a will now. I wasn't going to die from my foot injury, but just it woke up a lot of that sense of uncertainty and the need to make sure that there was that security in case something happened. So I think that was a bit of a wake-up call for me.
Back to Helen Mirren, the show must go on.
Absolutely.
And last but not least, we have Jules.
Hi, I'm Jules Anderson. I have a health, nutrition and corporate wellbeing business called Feel Glorious. I work with mainly women in their 40s and 50s, really to optimise health, going from that sort of building the foundations to really feeling absolutely at your best so that you can perform better at work, you can show up better in life, you're a better partner, you're a better parent, you're a better friend. And with that in mind, a similar story to Chloe's really about vulnerability. And recently, I got really, really busy. I had some new opportunities at work and some exciting things. And I was kind of not taking my own advice and pushing myself a bit too hard. And I got sick. I got a really nasty throat thing, and my voice just completely went for days. And I literally got to the point where I was very much show must go on. I'm a single parent, so you just don't want to let any of these plates crash to the floor. But I had to step back and go, I just have to clear my diary. I was so sick. I was like, I can't even read emails. I just can't be bothered. I'm Netflix and pots of tea, and that's all I can deal with right now. And I had to, there's a big vulnerability, again, in that. And especially, it's not just the impact. I always like to think that health is like your lead domino. If your health is there, everything else is kind of doable. You can keep the plate spinning. But if your health domino falls over, every other bloody domino just starts crashing to the floor. You know, it affected my cash flow. It affected my business and my opportunities because I missed some pitches. I missed some new business opportunities. It affected how I was as a parent to my son, who's going through, you know, he's just at that age where, you know, I'm about to be the empty nester. So he's got his anxieties. But also in terms of mental health and how all of these things, and, you know, George here will talk a lot more to that, but how it made me feel about myself as a person. For a start, it's like, I'm a blooming health expert and I'm sick. I have to call clients to say I can't show up because I'm not well. It's like, what kind of health expert am I? Which is nonsense because we're all human. But also, you know, how am I as a friend? I feel like my view of myself is I'm the person that shows up. I'm reliable. I pride myself in my work and as a friend. I couldn't come to Chloe's book launch, you know, and Evelyn was sponsoring. I couldn't come because I was ill. And it's like, I let people down. I didn't show up. And that affects my sense of my own self, which then has a domino effect on every other part of my life, because then you start to kind of question, you know, am I a great friend? Am I a great person? Am I a great health, you know, expert? And it made me, you know, again, you have to really think about that vulnerability, accept it, but then turn it around into taking some responsibility. For Chloe, it was like setting up wills and all of that. For me, it's like clear my diary, have some rest, stop pushing myself so damn much, and put myself through my own reset program again, you know, which I haven't done for a few years because I'm pretty healthy. But actually, we all need to do a pause and reset. So, you know, I think that's just really important for you know, all of us to really accept that vulnerability, but turn it into taking ownership and agency.
Exactly, and I think, so we are all human, we're all a work in progress, but it's not just one and done. You have to check in with yourself regularly and realise, you know, that actually the tank is a bit empty. You know, you can't pour from an empty cup. This is something we need to replenish. This is something we need to review. When things change, you know, I can never remember who it is that said, you know, that people make plans, and it was John Lennon said something about making plans and people laughing. You can, you know, these things do go awry sometimes. So, Jules, I've heard you talking before about catching the stitch in the jumper before it completely unravels. How do we, you know, is it something that we should put in our diary once a quarter, do something for you? Is that the best way to approach it, or what are your tips for getting ahead?
The dropped stitches is a really good analogy, actually. And, you know, in midlife, often we can find, you know, we're walking around with jumpers that are full of dropped stitches because we're juggling so much. And actually, our 40s and 50s are such a time of really profound change. As Sarah said, with her list of things that, you know, we'll have gone through by the time we're in midlife. Our bodies are changing. Our relationships are changing. You know, the majority of divorces happen when we're in midlife. And, you know, we've got empty nesting. Our children don't need us so much, or they're leaving home. That has a profound sense on our sense of identity. as well, and that can really affect us. So there's all of these things that go on, and again, a lot of the people coming to my practice, and women, they're coming in, there's this handful of, a bucket full of symptoms, from exhaustion to digestive issues and weight gain and random aches and pains. I can't sleep, I've got no sex drive. All of these things, they affect us physically, they affect us mentally, and they affect, again, the lead domino. Every other thing gets impacted when our health is struggling. So, and what a lot of, again, I would say 90% of women that I work with have had really negative experiences with their GPs, where they're basically told, well, what do you expect? You're just getting older. That leaves you, it's not only dispiriting, it leaves you completely disempowered. And actually, as the panel earlier on, were the idea that actually you have so much agency over your own health. Less than 20% of it is genetics. The rest is in our own hands. And we've got so much power now with personalised nutrition. Really intelligent, this one-size-fits-all of, you need to be vegan, you need to be keto, you need to be intermittent fasting. You need to be really personalised for what works for you, for your unique body. Because your unique body is very different from your best friend who felt great doing this programme, or the latest celebrity that's lost a ton of weight doing that programme. You've got to work out what really works for you. And again, there's so much, smart use of the technology. We've touched already on things like Whoop rings and Aura rings and Whoop bands, and using really smart technology. In my practice, we measure people's response to glucose. We measure people's response to stress and how well they recover from that. Whether it's Aura rings, Whoop bands, I use another piece of technology that helps. What I like about using technology is, rather than use it to just track, because again, people get obsessed. Oh, I've just had rubbish sleep, and then they carry on their day feeling awful that they've had rubbish sleep. They don't do anything about it. But if you use smart technology to really understand your own body, you can then make your own decisions about what to do with that information. And sometimes having objective data helps you get less emotionally involved. You step back from that, oh, I've just got no willpower, which is nonsense. It's nothing to do with willpower. It's to do with biochemistry and physiology. And when you understand objectively what's going on in your body from some of this tech, you can be more objective and take ownership and feel empowered about doing the right thing. And then adding in, again, intelligent, informed, considered, personalised lifestyle changes, all together are really going to help you take back the reins. Because the most important thing, again, is this, we talk about this sense of building security for the future, and we can be in midlife, and future can feel quite scary. We can feel a bit destabilized by all the changes going on in our bodies and lives. And if we can take ownership of at least of our health and really solidify that lead domino, make yourself not only feel better on a day-to-day basis, have more energy, lose a bit of weight, feel rested, have good night's sleep. You feel better on a day-to-day basis, but you're building really good, solid foundational stones. You're like really rooting that domino in the ground, which then is protecting every other aspect of your life, your finances, your relationships. As George was saying, those people that are going to show up for you, you've got the energy to show up for them. So again, really in terms of what we should be doing and where we should be focusing, I think really on understanding your own body and really committing and investing in building that lead domino, building your own strength, building your resilience, building your health. It's not selfish. As women particularly, we're used to putting ourselves last. We're running around after families and friends and businesses, and being able to prioritise ourselves, you end up benefiting everybody else anyway. But advanced thinking, do all that when it's just the loose threads. Don't wait for it all to unravel.
conversations before you need those conversations.
Exactly.
And actually, very, very quickly on the back to the clinicians. I was talking to a female doctor recently who does liver transplants, and I've got this written down because I don't want to get it wrong. But there is genuinely now evidence that operations by female doctors have better outcomes, and that's due to aftercare. I know. Sorry, blindsiding George now. Sorry, George. We're coming back to you in a minute. Because actually the subject is about, and I think what connects us all is we try and get our clients to have those conversations early. But sometimes they don't want to have those conversations because they're uncomfortable conversations to have. And that might be because you've just been through a divorce or you've just been bereaved and you really don't want... And sometimes I've actually talked to people who think the money which results from this inheritance, has come from this inheritance is to blame for what's happened. There's all sorts of stuff bound up in that. So our job is to get people comfortable with the uncomfortable. And when your relationship security or your health security is sort of that rug is pulled from underneath you, you will need an expert. But that is a hard conversation to start. So moving to Barbara and to George, how do you get your clients back into a position where they feel in control and they feel a sense of safety and comfort again?
Well, just going to the point of what Jules was mentioning, a client of mine actually died last week, and unfortunately he was aware that he had a heart condition and did nothing about it, and could have done with the help of Echelon. And what a shame, to die in your late 60s when you're actually in the middle of getting divorced, where you're planning a new future in a new relationship. And even more disconcerting that he didn't have a valid will. So he's ended up in a situation where the wife from whom he has been separated from for several years is now technically still his spouse, and she's entitled to take over his personal possessions as well as all of the assets and the like. So really gives you pause for thought that all the more reason to be planning for your health and well-being, and not taking the risks when you don't actually need to take those risks.
Yes, understanding the risks that you're taking by not
Yes.
having those conversations.
Yes, because as family lawyers, we will recognise that the greatest risks, in my view, certainly from a female perspective, is entering into a relationship, whether it be from a financial or emotional perspective. That is going to be the greatest risk that usually the woman will actually face. And I think the problem that we have is, how do we plan or how do we anticipate or assess what those risks are going to be? I mean, it's very difficult, isn't it, to sort of think about what the future is going to look like and what's going to happen to you, because you can't anticipate the sort of risks that may happen. And I think we can all go into situations where we can feel very comfortable at the beginning, but they change as they evolve. And I think as a family lawyer, in terms of my own experience, I recognise that all of us as families, where we have a different dynamic, we have a different narrative, we're all unique. I mean, we're all experiencing different facts on the ground and how we respond to them. And I think as individuals, we go into relationships where I think we can expect mutual respect in terms of our partners, but I think in terms of relationships, I wonder how many of us manage mutual responsibility in those relationships.
And jointly looking at finances from the start, so that, and perhaps,
Yes.
If then further down the line, one of you is going to take a career break, perhaps to bring up young children, at that point, you might have something like a post-nup or an agreement in place.
Yes, I mean, there are certainly tools that family lawyers can bring about. The prenuptial agreements is a very commonplace tool, but I think the position is a broader one. And I think sometimes we see family lawyers as divorce lawyers, and yes, of course, you know, divorce is something that we do, but from my perspective, a family lawyer is there to support and promote family life, and I think it's a broader role that you have in family, and it's the insight and the experience that you can bring to those relationships, and trying to have people understand that they're going into a relationship and the risks that they may face, and the sort of situations that they may encounter, that actually the legal tools is one aspect, but there are other aspects of the relationship, I think, for people to consider, such as, you know, the mutual respect, the mutual understandings, the broader view around whether you have the same values, and what you anticipate around the relationship, and how you run your finances, and how you maybe plan to protect your future selves, because you will each be bringing a different type of contribution to the relationship, and one may be financial and one may be not financial, but an equal contribution. And as I say, nobody knows what the lifetime of a relationship is going to bring in terms of the risks, but I think it's really important to protect one's future self.
So from what Jules has said, you know, we have to invest in our future selves and also protect our future selves. And all of this, of course, is role modelling, you know, really good open conversations for the future generations who...
Well, I think the problem is that in terms of my experience, I can see that preparation is key, and whether it be around finances or health or family, but often people can feel overwhelmed and there may not be easy solutions. And from my perspective, I think the first step is basically to have the conversation. As a family lawyer, the initial calls or conversations that we have are often not about legal issues. They will be maybe people wanting to use you as a sounding board, get a steer, maybe get a contact, an intermediary, have a conversation around broader issues around family life, and it could be around education, addiction, surrogacy. I mean, you know, it could be lots of different things where people are simply wanting a little bit of support.
And they want you to help them find another expert.
Yes.
Because it's not easy, is it? They want someone they trust to help them navigate that.
That's right. So as I say, you know, however overwhelmed you may feel, and how you may just want to park an issue and not think about it, a bit like doing a will, because actually it just feels a little bit overwhelming to sort of have to make all that planning and preparation. But if the first step is just have the conversation, because the power of understanding the boundaries, your rights, and how to protect your future self, to my mind, that's the key to a greater resilience.
Yeah, I agree entirely. Now, George and I had a very interesting chat about safety being a human need, and I saw a great quote: "Leap and the net will appear." And of course, having finances and all these conversations and legal ducks in a row is a great safety net. But actually, when your health security, when that rug is pulled, how do you get back into some sort of feeling of safety?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just want to link back actually to the conversation earlier with longevity, because I think that's quite an interesting thing to visit. A very interesting American from the National Geographic Society, him and his gang went off, and they produced a study a few years back, and they identified 5 what they call blue zones across the world, where there is evidence of these communities having longest life. They have the longest lifespans in the world, these 5 communities, and they're all in different parts of the globe. And they identified a few reasons for these long and relatively happy, stable lives, 90 plus years. And on the one side, you had diet and exercise, use of purpose and role, but the most noteworthy aspect to it was a sense of community and being part of that community and integrated into that community. So that was the kind of bedrock for longevity and safety within these communities. And I then sort of, looked a bit further into this to understand what is the wider application to what we're talking about here. And a group of guys from Harvard produced their separate study over 40 years on happiness. It was actually called the Study of Adult Development. And they identified over 40 years that people largely are happy or happier when they have 5 very good quality types of relationship established in their lives. And those 5 different types of relationship range from someone or a community that you're part of where you can have fun. Another one where you have someone or a community where you are linked into where you can learn and grow. And it goes on, but then there's another one, which is you need to have the person or the community where you can turn to for practical advice, reliable practical advice. And these are really key things to, again, feeling safe. And at the Soak, we obviously got a range of very talented clinicians, and 3 of whom are here today, and thank you, team. But a lot of mental health services will assess someone's health against very tried and tested clinical metrics, scores that will assess how depressed you are, how anxious you are. But actually, I think we took the view that there was a more nuanced way of looking at people, and we use a thing called dialogue, which actually assesses people's satisfaction across 8 domains of functioning in their life. Only one of those domains is mental health. Another one is physical health, and another one is sort of nutrition, and the list goes on. But there's one of those areas, which is when we ask people how satisfied are they with their sense of personal security, which is a really interesting question. And we've seen when we're working with individuals and organizations, corporates, that the most often is satisfaction with personal security low when 2 other metrics are low. And one of those metrics is satisfaction with your family relations, and another one is satisfaction with your friendships. So again, it links back to this idea of safety being directly linked to the relationships around you, and how are you fostering them, and when are you turning to what, and for what reason, in what situation. And I think, just from, clearly when we're assessing people, one of the aims, and we work very closely with lawyers like Barbara, but it is sort of trying to help people work out systemically where are the gaps in their Swiss Army knife of relationships. Where are those gaps? And if a gap is missing, let's identify what is the opportunity to develop that relationship, to give them that support so they can navigate what is life's inevitable transitions. But I just thought I'd leave you with one sort of other bit, which is maybe more practical and more immediate to look up, which I've always rather loved. Harvard, whatever Harvard do, Yale will do too. And Yale went off and did their own thing. And they, over the course of about 15, 20 years, came up with a concept called ruler. And that was to implement emotional literacy into primary age school kids in America. And it's now been going on for a couple of decades to really good effect. And the output actually of this is enabling kids to not only better understand themselves emotionally. When I'm feeling angry, what does that actually mean? But it also helps them better understand those around them, because that's very important too. And I think the ultimate output of it is emotional literacy. Good emotional literacy does lead invariably to a much greater degree of relational security. So I think if you're trying to find a way to create this community around you that you can use to get through the aspects of life that are complicated or uncertain, then part of it is taking time not just to know yourself a bit better, but also to actively be able to understand those around you and reflect on them. I think there's a lot of narrative nowadays where it's invariably getting quite selfish we're at risk of getting quite selfish in some respects. Yeah.
I was going to say that counterintuitively, I
Yeah.
think when people are under pressure and feeling stress
Yeah.
about situations in their lives, it can be quite isolating for them.
Yeah.
And bizarrely, that when I meet people in my work, the insight that I've gained is that people always think that either the grass is greener or everything's wonderful in somebody else's lives, and they've got no problems, and it's only their families who've got the problems and the issues, and how are they going to deal with them. And of course, the point about having these conversations is that nearly everybody I ever meet have different types of problems or similar stresses or concerns, whether it's about their parents or their children, and just sharing it and understanding that it isn't a situation where they should feel isolated, because there are people who can support and help them navigate a path through it all, because often there aren't solutions. And what we have to do is try and assess what's happening as well as learning how to manage it. But maybe that's the best that we can achieve.
Yeah, and I think management, this is largely about management, isn't it? I think a lot of people, when they enter a mental or psychological health service, for instance, they will hope, or in some cases assume, that they will be fixed, totally fixed. And I think, in some cases that is possible. But in others, it's really helping them to learn best to live with what's going on, to manage it. And I think part of that is absolutely around not feeling isolated. And I think if we go back to this idea of the concept of the sandwich generation, I think the biggest risk to that so-called group of people is this sense of feeling isolated, because you've sort of just gone into yourself. You've stopped investing in relationships. You think you've got to carry everything, haven't you?
You can't see beyond what's literally just right
Yeah.
in front of your face.
Yeah.
It's so difficult.
Yeah. But I think just in terms of pathways, we quite often will see families or couples coming to us, and they're looking for, again, that fix. It's sort of, make the situation go away. And part of it is actually just starting with a ground zero approach of, well, let's understand what the situation is, again, what the others were saying. And sometimes, particularly with couples, we will actually end up working with them, and it might lead to something like separation and divorce, when we will then start working with family lawyers.
Except what you hope, because divorce is the ultimate distress purchase, isn't it? What you hope is that in the timeline of a family life, the chronology of family, that you will recognise there are stresses within one's life. Some are going to be predictable, but that with the right support and help, that you can hopefully manage and maintain those relationships, that they are not going to end up in something as destructive as divorce. I mean, sometimes it's inevitable, but hopefully it's not always. And I think a lot will depend on people reaching out at the right time and looking for support and a steer.
Yeah.
And it can make all the difference.
And it's most definitely a stressful turning point, but I know we have someone on this panel who is extremely well placed to articulate exactly that, the reframing and the silver linings that can come out of divorce or separation. So this is over to Chloe.
Thank you, Lucy. What you were saying, George, was really resonating with me. That idea of having a team around you. And having that support network, especially when you're not feeling safe. And divorce is definitely a time where everything is unknown. Your future, as you envisaged it, has completely shifted. And so having that multidisciplinary team, whether it's therapists, financial planners, lawyers, wellness experts, coaches, it's all part of that support system that you need to have. To answer your question, Lucy, I mean, even the best of marriages involves some degree of compromise and some degree of deprioritizing yourself. And one of the silver linings, as you said, of divorce is that it's a unique opportunity to rediscover who you are. And I think that people often associate divorce with what I call the administrative process, which is not just paperwork, but the practical elements of separating assets and agreeing time with the children and literally getting divorced on paper. And that's an important part of it. But actually, the hardest and often the longest part of it is the emotional uncoupling. You have, for the past 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years been making decisions considering somebody else in that decision making. And suddenly you find yourself in a position where you're making decisions that are entirely for yourself and your children, of course, but that are no longer relative to the other person. And that can be a really difficult shift. I had one client recently who told me that she hasn't made a decision on her own in 18 years. And it was incredibly scary to her. Even just choosing a lawyer was incredibly scary to her because she didn't trust her instincts. She didn't know how to make decisions without her husband's perspective. And I think that emotional uncoupling is incredibly important as part of the process and often misunderstood. And that's what I help my clients do, is process that bit. And I think you can't possibly do a good job at the practical uncoupling if you haven't emotionally uncoupled, because you're making decisions that are based on what your future looks like. And that future doesn't involve the other person, or they involve them in a different shape if you have children together, but they're no longer there as your partner. And defining from the very beginning what you want your future to look like. What is that next chapter for you? It can be incredibly scary and overwhelming, but it's also an incredible opportunity to actually say, what do I want? What is it that I want to see come out of my life based on my hobbies, my interests, my needs? And in that sense, that process is going to be an incredible, powerful process in helping you shape that next chapter. And it's going to dictate how you make all the practical decisions. Do I want to keep the family house? Or actually, am I thinking I'm going to go live in New Zealand for the next 10 years? All of those considerations are based on your individual plans. And so I always start with my clients by defining that finish line. What do you want your life to look like after your divorce? And that means that as they're going through the process, they're making decisions with that very clear finish line in mind, and I bring them back to that when they get off track. I can't tell you how many clients come to me before having told their spouse that they want a divorce, and when I say, well, how do you envisage this process going? They say, oh, well, it depends on how they react. It doesn't. It does in part. But you also have a say in how it goes down and on how long it takes, how painful it is, how messy it gets. And by defining that track early on, you can remain in control and in the driver's seat of how this process is going to unfold, the amount of conflict, the amount of costs that usually comes along with the conflict.
Yeah, one of the issues that you're raising is, of course, one party is so ahead in terms of the emotional process. They've made the decision in their own mind to some extent, but you have to appreciate that the other party has to catch up.
Absolutely.
So the conflict, the shock, the upset, in a sense, has to be managed as well, because maybe somebody's been planning for quite some time that they see a different future for themselves. Yeah. And as I say, sometimes you have to say to somebody, well, put yourself into the shoes of the other party. It is going to be a terrible shock when Absolutely. They learn, particularly after what we call the silver splitters, where people are looking at new lives when they reach retirement. And I think that has to be managed very carefully if you are going to avoid the acrimony and the conflict and the costs, which will be inevitable if it's not properly managed.
You need to give the other person time to catch up, and they need to define their path as well. And the emotional uncoupling is relevant for both sides of the equation. I typically work with one of the two, so I'm helping them through their journey, but of course the other person needs to do the same. And the problems start when people are making decisions because of the other, to spite them, to get revenge, because they want to win. And then it's no longer decisions that are based on them. And it's really about reconnecting with who you are, who the best version of yourself is, and conducting yourself throughout that process based on who you are.
Can I just ask a quick question, though? Because in that process, we often find as well, it's how you support the rest of the kids through that. Because absolutely, you've got a relationship going on, a dynamic, and you're right, someone might have been planning this for way longer. There's always that case. But there's also that narrative that then will be played out more widely within the family, where kids might blame one versus the other. Kids might feel more aligned, therefore, to a victim of the partnership. So it's how you actually get alignment through the process, take the sting out of, or the heat out, out of the emotions, so that kids will look to their parents and feel a bit more respectful of both of them and both of their needs. And I was just wondering, is that something you have come across quite regularly, and how do you manage that?
As you can imagine, yes. Yeah. I think that's part of the problem, that when people are starting to act against each other, they lose track of what they have in common, which is the children. And actually, while you're looking after yourself, your children's well-being is also a way of looking after yourself, and that needs to remain your priority. And working as a team, it's just about shifting. You're moving away from being in a romantic relationship to being into a parenting relationship exclusively, but you're still a team. It's a different shape of team. There's different emotions involved in that team, but you still have an objective with regards to your children, and that has to remain at the center. And you'll never see, I don't think I've ever had a client, when I ask them what matters to them, who have said, I don't care about my children. They will always put that at the center. Nonetheless, when you lose track of the emotional management, you do forget about your children, because you're angry and you want to, take for a tat to your ex. And actually, even though it's bad for the kids, you lose track of that. Yep. And that's where I help keep them on track.
Right, panel. Any further questions have to wait for the coffee break. Please take the opportunity in the coffee break to ask these amazing experts. It's such a privilege to sit here and listen to you, but also to remember what a privilege we're all in, because we do live these challenges with our clients all the time. And it's very easy to forget that everyone else who doesn't do what we do and isn't party to these family conversations, don't necessarily realise or see the transformational impact of helping someone get out of a position of, feeling in control back into the position of having some agency, and what an amazing impact that can have on them. So, in the interest of time, we have, in 3 words, what do people need to do after this to try and build on, hopefully, some of the wisdom that we've managed to impart. And I have one final thing to say, which is there's no such thing as a silly question. So please come and ask questions. The sillier, the better, as far as I'm concerned. Thank you. Sorry, I want to get the top tips.
Well, I think I go back to my point of have the conversation.
Yeah. Early.
10 years' time.
Brilliant.
I'd say surround yourself with the right people.
I'd just say get some clarity, get an initial consultation, whether it's legal, relationship, health. Get an initial consult. When you know where the land lies, you know what you can do with it, and make a plan.
Fabulous. Thank you, everyone.